Welcome to Authors and Innovators, our series focused on authors, innovators, and big thinkers. I am here once again with my partner in crime, the esteemed journalist Doug Banks, executive editor at the Boston Business Journal. Doug, it is great to see you. You're looking summery.
Thank you. Yes, I'm in my summer casuals today.
Absolutely. No bow tie, so this will be one of the firsts. I'm very, very excited. Today's guests, Ebony Reed and Louise Story, are authors of an amazing book, 15 Cents on the Dollar. It is a sweeping narrative history of black wealth and the economic discrimination embedded in America's financial system. It is a must-read, in large part because it is a series of amazing stories about real people facing real economic consequences. Ebony is a journalist and the chief strategy officer at the Marshall Project, a nonpartisan nonprofit news organization focused on the U.S. criminal justice system. Louise is an investigative journalist, a filmmaker, and she teaches at the Yale School of Management. Ebony and Louise, welcome. We are very, very pleased to have you here. I know that Ebony is a veteran of the Boston Business Journal, so we are happy to welcome the hometown author back.
Great to see my friend and coworker Ebony. Great to have you here. Great to meet you, Louise.
Great to see you.
And the book is out June 18th, but it seems to me, and Doug and I were talking a little bit about this when we first talked about the book, it seems to me that the title of the book sets the table for the conversation. Ebony, Louise, do you want to talk about that?
You know, maybe I could back up and share a little bit with you about how we came together to do this book.
Wonderful.
And then we can talk about like our main goal with this book and public impact project that we hope will set the table or help set the table in many communities across the country. You know, back in 2020, when we had our first pandemic summer and we were all locked in our homes, we couldn't go anywhere. Louise and I were colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, and I had joined her team literally like maybe 6 months before. And so we were having conversations at that time about what we were seeing in the world, what we had seen in the workplace. We started reading books together, having conversations about, various things such as how, the economic crisis from 2008, 2009 impacted people differently across the country and who had recovered from it. And so before we knew it, we hadn't planned to embark on a project that would trace the black-white wealth gap all the way to present day with real living people. But we found ourselves in a discussion and we thought, there's no book that we had seen that had quite done that. There are lots of books out there that have, covered redlining or banking, different aspects of it. But to try to pull it all together, we thought there's no better pair of journalists to do this than the two of us. And we thought we would be the perfect team for this.
And it seems that you are. What I like about this, Louise and Ebony, is that it is not even so much telling as it is showing. So you pick 7 different lives and you amplify them. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how you decided to shape the book around the lived experience of 7 Americans?
Yeah, and I just want to add to that because that's really one of the things that I found most powerful, Larry, as well. Just when you're talking about a black-white wealth gap, and you do have a lot of numbers, and it is about there's a lot of economics here, but you really back it up. You really use compelling stories. So I was like Larry, would love to hear just the power of storytelling versus trying to make a case with data, as compelling as that data is.
Well, we have a couple goals for the project, and they speak exactly to what you're saying. One of our goals is to raise awareness of the statistic 15 cents on the dollar. That is the black-white wealth gap, so to speak, because the typical black family has 15 cents in wealth compared to $1 in wealth held by the typical white family. And so we made the title that because we figure even if people are watching this and they don't buy the book, they're getting the statistic by hearing us talking about it. And that will be powerful because around the country, people don't know what it is. And in fact, a lot of people think it's gone away. But one of our other top goals is to, in our own little way, spread more empathy in the world, help people think more about what it's like to be in other people's shoes, and help people have more give and take in communities for the situations other people are in, many of which they're born into or because of where they live. And it's through these people who we spend an immense amount of time with that we think this empathy and this personal journey you'll go on when reading our book will occur, because in their stories, it also gives a bit of a mirror to you, whether you're white or black. It makes you think, okay, well, what happened to my family in the 1890s? And what happened to my family in the 1950s? And how is it similar or different to this? I'm sure you both went on that journey too, Larry and Doug.
It's a powerful journey because you're asking people to be a bit more introspective, even if they're not thinking about it initially. Brooke Bacon, New Hampshire native, is somebody you profiled. Talk a little bit. I want people to read the book. I don't want to give too much away, but Brooke's story is pretty powerful. Could you folks weigh in on that and how you selected Brooke? Who is Brooke? And why is his story integral to the story, the overall story you're trying to tell?
Well, Brooke, we first met Brooke in the late summer, early fall of 2021 in Georgia, Screven County. He was going on a justice walk to raise attention to his father's death. His father had been killed by the police there, and he was trying to get attention on this case. And, since his walk, his family did receive a settlement from the state of Georgia relating to his father's death. But, he had lived in many places as a child. His mother, had moved him, to Rhode Island. They, ultimately come to Boston. And she was in search of a better place for him. Every time she took a new job, she was trying to find, a better economic place for him. And when he finally got to college, Brooke went to school, at Northeastern. He had a situation where his mom was also in school. He would go to school for, a semester, and he needed ultimately a co-signer to continue. And so through his story, we not only see the impact of what happens with, an intersection with the criminal justice system, with his dad, with, police, but then we see the economic issues that his mom faces as a single parent. We see him dealing with student loans. We see him dealing with, issues of unemployment. In the book, we have the statistics about, Black unemployment is typically higher than white unemployment historically. And he ultimately marries a white woman. He moves to New Hampshire and settles into life there. Prior to the summer of 2020, when his father was killed, he really hadn't spent, a lot of time deeply reflecting on his Black roots. But when his father was killed, that was a turning point in his life. And Louise and I chronicle that in the book.
It is a terrific story. Talk a bit about how we talked a lot about the wealth gap. Louise, how are we defining wealth for purposes of the book and this project?
Americans have all different definitions of wealth, and a lot of people are confused about what it is. But we use the Federal Reserve definition, which is simply what you own minus money that you owe. Or another way people put it is your assets minus your liabilities. But I will tell you, when you start talking with people about this book even, you'll likely hear many people start talking to you about income. They'll say, well, I know that the person, of a different race who sits next to me at work makes the same amount, but that's income. And income is different than wealth. And actually, you can look at people with the same income across racial lines, and they often have different wealth. And the other confusion people have is they also forget about debt. So you might see someone and think because they have a big house, they're wealthy, but you may not know about the mortgage debt they have or the student loans they have. So debt is kind of hidden. So we try to be very clear in the book about what wealth is. And we think if more people understood what wealth is in a better way, they would understand society and the differences in their community.
One of the other discoveries I think readers will learn, and thank you for that, is that the black-white wealth gap isn't just as simple as black and white. You also noted in the book a number of different class distinctions as well that are at play here, and you have some really interesting observations on the black elite and sort of the perceptions around that. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the other maybe perhaps surprising things that you learned in your journey in writing this.
Sure. I think one of the things that was surprising, or that we hope people will explore and think about as they're reading the book, is if someone says we want to close the black-white wealth gap, or our mission of our organization is to close the black-white wealth gap, then when you look at Black Americans, the question is for who are you trying to close it? You know, is it for everyone across the board? Is it for Black Americans who are have higher incomes, have higher net worth? I mean, you can close the gap by focusing on just a portion of the Black community, and that is a completely different approach than trying to close it, for a broader group of people. And so we do, through looking at the functions of a entrepreneurship venture in the book, not to give too much away, we do explore, what that means.
And are the two of you hopeful about what can happen? Boston Globe ran a story about the gap disparity being slightly lessened when it comes to pensions and retirement assets. Did you see any different classes of assets that gave you some hope, that had you thinking, well, this might be a place where policymakers, CEOs, leaders can lean in?
So it is true, there's different things if you look at just the housing wealth or the amount of stock ownership or the amount of business ownership. And actually, since 2019, there's been a very significant spike in business ownership for Black Americans. More Black Americans do own businesses. I do want to caveat, though, that data is just what percentage of Black Americans own businesses. But that data point doesn't capture how big are those businesses, how many people do they employ,
Right.
what revenue do they make, and that's often a real differential that white-owned businesses have more employees. But I will say one thing that I'm watching with interest is whether AI, with some of the tools that AI has to enable small businesses to do things, whether that will help close the gap a little bit with small white and Black businesses. And the reason I say that is with Black entrepreneurs, the most difficult step is just that first step, getting the bank loans or having the private social network to give you the starting capital, which white Americans often have. And without that, it's hard to go from 1 to 10 people. But AI really does have all these tools, if you use them smartly now, to build your websites, to do all these things that maybe you don't need. That person number 2, 3, 4 might not be as essential. So that's an interesting area to watch. And I think people paying attention to training on AI tools for all people is an important thing.
Interesting trend to watch. Ebony and Louise, this is a special book to you, and you talk a bit about profits from the book. This isn't a typical, gee, we're going to write something just to enhance our own wealth. Can you talk a little bit about what you hope in terms of what you hope for in terms of impact from profits or otherwise people reading the book?
Sure. I mean, our number one goal, as Louise mentioned, is to spread the statistic 15 cents on the dollar. We think if more people and communities across the country understood that statistic, then it would have an impact and it would shape conversations about everything from student loans to banking to affordable housing. And so that's part of the reason that we have been on the road since February, going around the country, having racial wealth gap symposiums and talking in different communities about this issue. We've been in community centers, we've been in museums, we've been in people's homes. We are hitting 8 states this month. And in terms of the profits from the book, Louise has committed to, and she has already donated all of her profits from the book to charities and nonprofits that focus on Black Americans, journalism, education. I have donated a portion of mine, which include support to 2 scholarships in the name of my late fiance, who was also a well-known journalist.
Oh, I love this. You're conveners. This is a book that will stay with you. Louise and Ebony, Doug and I always ask this, and I'm going to put Doug on the spot. What are you reading? What are you watching? What are you thinking about? You won't have much time, I know, once the book tour launches, but talk about that a little bit. Louise, what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you thinking about?
I'm listening to a couple books while I run each day. And they're both by amazing former colleagues from the New York Times. And one is Chasing Hope by Nick Kristof. And it's just a phenomenal book talking about the power of journalism and the mission of it, which I know Ebony and I both relate to a lot. And then the other one is by Lawrence Ingrassia. It's called A Fatal Inheritance. And it's a sad, disturbing, but in some places uplifting book. It's about research on a rare gene tied to cancer and Larry's own family. And the reason I say uplifting is because he shows people, even with these terrible genes in their family, still living life to their fullest. And I recommend that one also, A Fatal Inheritance.
Wow. Ebony, what are you reading or listening to?
So I am in the audiobook of Legacy by Dr. Uche Blackstock. It is a phenomenal book that traces the history of discrimination with medicine in our country, and she shares her personal family story. And so I find it to be so powerful. I am also have recently finished the series on Apple called Manhunt. And, initially when I started watching, I thought, oh, I don't know if it will be this interesting about, the assassination of President Lincoln. But I will tell you the way that it weaves in the stories of Black Americans and what happened historically in our country, it is amazing.
Wow. Wow. And Doug, you are always either listening to or reading something interesting. Tell us what you're listening to. Tell us what you're reading.
Well, right now I've been most recently I started listening to a podcast called Acquired, and the episode that I listened to, this is a 3-hour sort of Silicon Valley podcast. And the episode that I listened to was on 3 hours on Novo Nordisk, which is the company, the Denmark company that created Ozempic and Wegovy, the GLP-1 diabetes and obesity drugs. So that's put a crimp in my reading. But I'm also reading a book, and the book that I'm still working on is The Crimean War by Orlando Figes, who's a fantastic historian of Russian historian. And most of us know the Crimean War as, Charge of the Light Brigade or Florence Nightingale. But the war in Crimea, which took place just before the U.S. Civil War in the middle 19th century, 1850s, it speaks to what's happening in Crimea today with the Ukraine war.
Wow.
It really resonates, and the politics and everything building up to it are just fascinating. So I've written down the books from Ebony and Louise. I'm going to tackle them next.
Well, that's terrific. And I see how history threads through all of this. So I will add at least one that I would suggest listeners to Authors and Innovators pair with 15 cents on the dollar. And that is No Right to an Honest Living, The Struggles of Boston's Black Workers in the Civil War Era by Jacqueline Jones, which won the Pulitzer a month ago. Jacqueline Jones is a terrific author. We've had an interview with her that is now posted on authorsinnovators.org. It really helps underscore the important points in 15 cents on the dollar. It goes back to pre-Civil War migration, the pre-Civil War migration of a group of freed enslaved people who come from Virginia to Massachusetts in hopes of a better life. And what happens next is the stuff of this book. It is an uplifting, disturbing, irritatingly important book that I hope people will look at. And I've just finished also along the lines, and I think you could read this after 15 cents on the dollar. Is your work worth it? How to think about meaningful work, and more to come on that. So I want to thank Louise and Ebony, and of course Doug. The book is 15 cents on the dollar: How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. Please find it at your independent bookstore soon. It is terrific. Ebony, Louise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.